So perhaps to set the stage for today's conversation, right, David, I wonder if you could begin by giving us perhaps your general answer or take on the question of what you think is computational social science. And I wonder if you also have some comments to give about the scope of computational science, social science, as well as where you see the boundaries lie in this space. David, please.
Okay, thanks. Contrary to our blazer-looking thing, I think we want to keep this as informal as we can, right? First, I want to thank, before I go into your question of what is computational social science or CSS, I just want to thank Phuket, of course, A Star for hosting this. As you know, it's part of the Ideas Festival. I see Elaine there, who's the chair of the organizing committee, did a lot of work. We are extremely proud to be the first event after the launch on Wednesday. And of course, this is under the initiative of SSRC, and the chairman, Mr. Peter Ho, is here. Right, so that is, those are not just formalities, I think those are very important. The fact that I think we are going to have one whole month long of events on social sciences. We have collaborations happening. You know, you have, I'm on sabbatical, by the way, you know, but I'm here, and people know that David Chan is supposed to be on holiday and is still around. That means it's something that he treasures and values quite a bit. So A-Star, please know. I think before I answer the CSS, I think question, I just also want to say a little bit about your very nice introduction of me, maybe just to fill up the time a little bit. About 15,000 citations. Don't be too carried away by numbers like that. I think when we look at impact, you know, if I happen to publish a wrong formula in certain disciplines, I will get cited a lot of times. So when people have high impact factors in the traditional metrics, do take a look, as that's one of the indicators. I'm not saying that people with high citations are all bad people. I can't possibly be saying that, but don't just look at it unidimensionally, right? And similarly, I think when we look at computational social sciences, I hope this session we can talk a little bit of the pros and cons. You know, be excited about it. We must, otherwise we wouldn't put resources. But don't be carried away that anything with computational must be better than social sciences without the word computational, for example. Or the computational social science, you know, when branded as such, must be better than something that's more computational without a social scientist on the team. Right? I think that gets clearer, I hope, as we discuss. So to your question on what is CSS, if you use CSS for short, computational social science or social sciences. Maybe I can just start by saying that about a few months ago, in CUHK, Chinese University of Hong Kong, they had a computational social science lab actually. So they approached me and say, okay, let's do something together. So I think I was one of the keynote speakers, but you know, we turned it into a panel discussion. And I was asked the same question, so it's easy. I'm going to just repeat from my recollection, which is what I truly believe, right? The first question I think to ask is, should it be computational social science or computational social sciences? Right? People get very worked up, you know, with things like that, especially academics. Right? Yeah, faculty of social science, no, faculty of social sciences. Is it school of social science or school of social sciences? Right now, worse, you put the word computational in front, and people like computational social science or computational social sciences. I confess that. By the way, I've been doing computational social sciences even when I was a grad student. Later, you know, we can share a little bit of when you think about computational social science, it's really not that new. But when we started using this term, I think in the last 10 to 15 years, initially I was quite particular. I was saying that it should be computational social sciences with a plural. Right? In the same way that when my behavioral sciences initiative is called sciences and not science, because we were very concerned that the moment you don't put the S, you know, people felt excluded, and people don't appreciate the multidimensionality, the different perspectives. But in more recent years, I think I changed my position on this. Right? I think it's both a singular and a plural. It is plural because you cannot do it alone, no matter how good you are within your own discipline. So you need the sciences, and that, may I say, the humanities as well to all come in. But it is singular because, and Peter also mentioned this just 2 days ago, right? Because for the past 30 years, whenever I teach, I always say that the world is not compartmentalized, right? We are compartmentalizing the world through our knowledge, the way we organize disciplines. And once you recognize that, you then have the humility that, yeah, actually it's just one science because you're trying to get the insights to solve a particular issue. So that derives and that gives us the commonalities. But we still have to answer your question, right? What is CSS? As opposed to just say social sciences. I think maybe this is a little bit more for the traditional social scientists, right? Now, if I do a study and I say that, oh, we've with increased digitization in Singapore, what is the effects on the lower income versus the higher income? Do they feel threatened? How do they adopt innovation? Then I go do a survey and I ask them these questions. I try to do good psychometrics measurement, I bring some sociological, psychological theory, I report the survey results, and the doing digitization effects, right? Now that to me is not computational social science per se, but that is just good old traditional social sciences, and you happen to be studying digitization or digital society. I think computational social science or sciences, no matter how you talk about it, it has to be characterized by some kind of technology-enabled measurements, technology-enabled data, and in fact quite specific, right? The data tend to be quite different from our traditional social, psychological, political science data that we are very used to. And that's where the threat comes in. The threat comes in because the longer you stay in the social sciences, the better you become. Actually, the more resistant you are to new things and other things that are outside your discipline. And so computational social science is a challenge because I think at the crux of it, there must be some technology-enabled stuff. And that stuff is mainly tools, measurement, and data. But then when you dig deeper, right, it is also about conceptualization, meaning of causality, meaning of emergence, and so on. And that gets translated into solving problems. A little bit abstract here, but I think as we go on, maybe in the discussion as well, it becomes clearer about why the definition, the boundaries, the scope is quite important. Otherwise, everything becomes computational social sciences, which shouldn't be. But what is the crux of it? And then I think then that tells us what can you value add beyond traditional social sciences.
Thank you so much for that insight, David. I think it makes me think along two possible directions. I think one, if I capture the essence of what you described, first, the inclusiveness of the plurality of it, that's one, that's an important point, where we really want to be inclusive in terms of involving multiple disciplines and then looking at how computational resources and approaches can in fact lend additional insight to the study of these multiple disciplines. But yet, the fast emerging developments of this field in the singular sense of it is the establishment of CSS as a unique and well-defined field of approach in itself, which is what the singularity would look like. Hopefully that's along these lines. But along those lines, right, I think a burning question therefore is, be it the singularity or the singular or plurality of this, what do you see really as its value, right? What kind of value propositions do you think it can enable, both for us as researchers seeking to understand this phenomena a bit more, as well as practitioners, as well as folks who look at trying to create real impact? Like, are there particular examples or topics, especially in this case, where you think CSS in both instantiations of it can contribute beyond the more traditional, well-established approaches that social science disciplines already do? And the devil advocate's question here is, and I think perhaps welcome your thoughts about it. Can't we just do multidisciplinary social science without the computation part itself? Thanks.
Okay, it's a very long question. I see that A-star folks are learning to be social scientists. We speak extremely lengthy. Okay, let me try to be a good social scientist, and the crux of it, I think you're asking me what are some examples. And I think that the question seems to be a bit more directed to our traditional social scientists, which are many of you. And also if there's a video, whoever who's listening later, about it's almost like saying, why can't I be just doing my own thing, But you were kind, you added multidisciplinary, and you were saying that, well, if I'm a psychologist, why can't I just go with a sociologist? Isn't that good enough? Maybe economist. Why should I go and do your computational stuff, especially if I know nothing about agent-based modeling, simulation, and all, and I'm in my 40s or 50s, should I bother? Or if I'm a new PhD, I have a 10-year prejudice, should I bother, right? Those are very legitimate questions. Those are questions that actually we struggle with in all our universities because trying to impress people the importance of CSS is not easy for our traditional social scientists. Our young folks have tenure pressures. They want to publish in their own discipline, the top journals. some of which are more likely than others to know about CSS. If you're in psychology, you're quite fortunate. Most of our psychology people love CSS and know the importance, right? No matter which subfield I would dare say, or most of the subfields. When you're in other discipline that I shall not name, it's a little bit more challenging, right? When you see the word computational, they was like, no, humans are not numbers, that kind of thing. So I think it is a challenge and a legitimate question. I will answer, and then you ask about specific examples in order to back up, I guess, the answer that you try to get it from me. I would put it this way, right? Yeah, you actually can do it without CSS. I think people will be shocked about my answer. You can, why not? Just that if you are young, you'll probably be behind the curve. You'll be a bit more obsolete than earlier than you think. If you are old, that's fine. You'll probably be near the end of your career, but you may not leave a legacy, I think, for the people. And that's why 59-year-old David Chan is still here, right? Because I think it is important, especially the older established social scientists in Singapore, to take an interest in CSS, even though you're not familiar, because you are the leaders, the current leaders at least of your social scientists, and the more junior ones look up to you, right? And if your position is that you don't have to know all these numbers thing on CSS, I think you might be doing them a little bit of a disservice, not a little bit, actually quite a lot of disservice, right? Because we want our mid-level and younger professors and researchers to really pick up this wave, right? And that's why I don't care about your age. When you have an opportunity to collaborate with institutions like A-Star, I would say try to do it. It's going to be harder work than do your own thing, but you need to. Now, examples. Why? If you look at the world around us, right, I was first answer it conceptually if I had the time, and then I go to it a bit concretely to examples. The digitization is clear, right? The rate of change is exponential. Right? You look at Industrial Revolution all the way, I don't want to go too far back to Renaissance, and then you come back to here. It is really exponential, So you have the computer revolution, the cognitive revolution, right? And then now you have a look at it, people talk about Industrial 4.0, and things change so fast. What that means really that and just look at ChatGPT is a good example, right? So a lot of our skills and knowledge as social scientists could be quite unimportant in the very short future. And to maintain your relevance, you have to know about computational social sciences, know what they do, because that is what the world is happening. That's the real world, right? Our world is full of computational stuff now. And think about examples of the data that we are exposed to every day, right? We are always, there is not a single day you are not involved in computational social science as a data provider. Not a single day, right? Because you touch your headphone, right? You do e-commerce, right? You call your Grab, that's geospatial location data, right? You take the MRT, that's your transport data, right? And if you're in Hong Kong, right, your Octopus card, right, is connected everywhere to what you buy, go to 7-Eleven, you take your transport, you can do so many things with the card, and so all your data are actually dynamic, connected, and so on. That you can say, I don't care that's aspect of life, but that's going to be the whole aspect of life, right? Nobody, in a way, take the pen and write things anymore. Bank transactions, urban planning, right? You have to know about crowd movements. You have to know about what people tend to like and not like. When you see people gathering, is that happy density, vibrancy, or is that a riot about to happen? Right? Your traditional social science actually cannot deal with such real-time, dynamic, evolving data very well. And that's where CSS comes in very important, right? The various kinds of tools they have, be they agent-based modeling kind of simulation or some other statistical mechanics, if you like, which is a little bit outmoded compared to agent-based modeling, are very, very important. But they need us, because they don't have the social behavioral insights. And we don't want them to reinvent the wheel, right? And when you marry the two together, and then and only then, I think you can solve the problem. So I would argue that very soon, without CSS, if you just stick to your social sciences, you can stay for a time, but there will be a time that I think you'll be a bit irrelevant. And I think very dangerously, you'll probably not capture the real phenomenon that we care about. All the things that we care about in social sciences actually are multi-level nested structures, right? Because we don't operate alone. David Chan operate in a group, the group operate in a school, the school operate in a team, the team operate in Singapore. So we are multi-level. So these are nested data, they have a very different structure from just treating us as independent observations. The statistician knows what I'm talking about, some psychologists do, sociologists who are quant know what I just said, but most of the social scientists probably think, what is that? Right? And that is very important. That multi-level structure things, the kinds of data that's what the world is, right? The world is not independent observations. The world is in a nested structure. The second thing about the world's data is the world data are processual, they are temporal. Our surveys don't capture that, neither do our laboratory experiments very well, nor our focus group discussions, methods, and so on. What we do is we take a cross-sectional snapshot, right, of a process, and then we try to interpret what happens if you get that slice wrong. You just have 7 data points in your longitudinal study. I'm afraid, yeah, that's what we do, but now we don't have to do that, right? We have actual, continuous, dynamic data that are evolving, and then when you look at the big data characteristics, it's not something sophisticated to be afraid about. That is what is happening in the real world, right? You don't have to be a wonderful programmer. In fact, I wouldn't advise you to try to learn programming and do everything at your age. Most of you, I'm just talking about some of you, not all of you. But there are many things that you can offer, right? And then so you need to work in a cross-functional team with people who know better, and then you know a lot of things that they don't, they know a lot of things that you don't, right? And then I think when we come together, then you can understand really what it means when we talk about quality of life and living, right, in the digitized world and in the digital world. So you can't study adaptability or resilience of a country, of a people, of a social cohesion, of a community, actually without knowing, to me, without knowing much about computational sciences at all. Moving forward, if we stick to our own methods, I don't think you can provide very important insights for both science and policy makers in terms of practice or for businesses and so on. A bit cheap, I know, but you know, I think it gets clearer. I think maybe interacting with the audience.
Excellent point, David. I think looking at the way things are happening right now, I think there's indeed a huge explosion of possible data sources, data types, and then especially now we are really in a very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, right? And when we are looking at all these multiple streams of data, therefore, while they present to us these huge opportunities in providing this insight, how should we go about dealing with the ever-present issues relating to, for example, standards, data access, and even, for instance, how should we go about interpreting that data in a responsible and a manner held to high standards? What are your thoughts about that?
So I'm going to assume by standards you mean data quality, right? Because we are empirical sciences, CSS is empirical. So it is from the data you make your inferences, upon which you make your practical recommendations. So when you say standards, I think ultimately it's about data quality, right? And that data quality would mean, of course, your design, your methodology, the kinds of data you collect, is it, what's the veracity and so on. In other words, does it really mean what you think it means or what the person say? So unlike surveys and to some extent experiments or focus group, a lot of the computational social science data are not subjected to the same problems such as social desirability, faking, and so on. Right? Because when I take the MRT from Tanjong Pagar to come here, I don't fake, right? There's nothing to fake about it. I just take, and then you just see my EasyLink card. I took a Grab today, and then that's it, right? I mean, there's nothing to fake about, right? But on social media, yeah, I can pretend to say something that's very pro-government or very anti-government, which is quite different maybe from David Chang in the real world, right? Yeah, but we can talk about that. I would argue that that's not faking, actually. That's just, we operate in parallel different worlds. And that's very important, right? I hope we have time to talk about that. But to your question, I think about the standards, right? I think this is the biggest challenge. Right? If there's one thing that I worry about and one thing that I really hope I can do something together with all of you about is data quality, right? And I use data quality very broadly to ultimately go to the issue of inferences, right? Because the computational tools and methods and data are happening so fast, right? Even you stay there, the data keep happening, Right now the data, there are millions and millions of data in Singapore that are being produced from 2:30 until now. There are really millions and millions, maybe trillions of data being produced, right? Data. And what that means is that these data are form data. So when you or Sui or Joe or whoever, actually you are not short of data. You just go and connect with somebody, you will have billions and tons of big data that you can analyze with. You don't even need to go and like beg people for data. And that's good, but that's dangerous, right? And because the data is so attractive, and many of them are openly available, they won't just give to A-Star, they will give to SMU and NTU and US. So we rush to analyze, we rush to come out with a model, and we rush to tell government, oh, this is what's happening and so on, right? And we don't have enough time to really analyze because you're so afraid that another competitor will do it first. And that's the ecosystem produce a problem. We are fast to have tools to look at the data, to say something to government, to show our relevance, or to publish because we want to get tenure. And we don't pay enough attention to data quality, right? You might be having a piece of data that really need a method that's quite different from what you apply. You might need the social scientists help to do latent growth modeling, and agent-based modeling was just the first step, and you need to connect it with latent growth modeling, something which you might have never heard about, but maybe that's the only correct method to do it, right? And so I would say that the biggest problem is that in the social sciences, the empirical ones at least, say psychology, for example, of course, which I'm most familiar with, we have very clear psychometric standards, right? Or in education, right? You know exactly this is called reliable, this is not reliable, how to increase reliability. You know that in a measure, if I want to measure personality, when can I say that this is a good measure, lousy measure, how to make it better, and how people are really faking. We know what is validity, the different kinds of inferences. We know good experiments, we know how to disconfound things. You know how to apply causal models in a way that, oh, this is actually not what you've seen. These are all very well established over 200 years, and you're back up internationally. But in computational social sciences, it's a bit different. Right? There was a time, I think the time is gone, I hope. There was a time, if you heard of generative sufficiency, there was a time where they say that in a simulation, right, so long as I can produce an output that is quite similar to the things that can happen in the world, that is enough, that's validation. So it's called generative sufficiency. It is sufficient to generate a scenario that looks realistic, or I can say that, look, this is a scenario where the crowd movement can occur, when a riot occur, and then it look like, yeah, and then you say that is valid. Most good CSS people now know that that's not sufficient. No pun intended, right? That's generative ability to generate a realistic scenario is necessary but not sufficient, right? For good model in CSS, right? What you need is validation, but your notion of validation reliability is really quite different from the established social science methods. So we need to learn from each other, right? On how you can apply established methods. Now, having said that, this is a little bit more sophisticated, right? And I hope next time we can do a workshop on this. Having said that, the traditional social science people don't be too arrogant, because some conceptions of our well-established reliability validity does not apply to big data. Right? Because big data by definition is evolving in every data point. Their notion of systematic random error, their notion of changes, margin of error is quite different from all kinds of static data that we are used to. The static data where today I analyze, tomorrow another researcher analyze is still the same. The dynamic data is different, right? Because it's dynamic and the interdependencies are different. It is doable, right? We actually have the techniques, and I'm a quant person, right? So we have the techniques to actually work with the computer people, computational people, to solve the problems together. But if we just apply simple classical methods that we are used to, you can sometimes get it wrong. So don't be too confident that you are always right? It is a learning process, I think, for both sides. So I don't have a good answer for you, other than saying that it's the most urgent thing on my plate, right? I think standards are most important. It is not resources. I think resources you'll get in Singapore for research. It's not even collaboration, which is a very important thing, because I think people know that we can't, to quote Minister Chan that 2 days ago, right? We already know that our real competitor are not between the AUs or between A-Star and SMU, right? It's about working together, because we need to work together.
Thanks, David, very much for that. I do have a lot of thoughts that actually I want to, I hope to pick up some of your points later with a chance during my segment. I'll address some of these points. But especially the generative sufficiency point, which is an issue related to speaking different lingo, different languages across disciplines. Then hopefully I can share more later with everyone as well. Then perhaps a final, maybe perhaps a general question for you before we open it up more generally to the audience. I do have quite a number of questions, but we want to give them the due opportunity to also feel some. So David, perhaps as a general question, right? Where do you see for us as a community, right, the opportunities for applying this approach in Singapore especially? Where do you think the opportunities lie? Would you be able to give us perhaps a top three or list of where these opportunities might look like? Thanks.
You mean areas of applications?
Yeah, for advancing the field.
5 years ago, I would have to scratch my head to try and how to give you topics, areas, and then how to prioritize. Today, I will have to scratch my head how to tell you which area there's no application. Right? I cannot think of an area that our social scientists are interested in already that you cannot apply CSS. I mean, that sounds terribly arrogant, right? Citing the CSS people. No, I can't think of an area. Right? If we have time, we can sit down together and I challenge you to a debate, right? Show me an area that you care about, a stream or program of research where CSS is irrelevant. You might not be doing it, your community might not be doing it, but as I explained, because we live in the digital world of nested multi-level structures of interdependency and dynamic movements, that if you are an empirical scientist at least, you need to look at those and your techniques are quite limited, right? By your three areas, I'm a little bit hesitant to say, but I'm going to just go around and say that, look, we have been doing it very well already in urban planning, right? Mr. Peter, right, is the chairman of URA, and once upon a time I was also on some of the advisory panels. So I do know a little bit about urban planning, right? Urban planning is most of you also know, right? There's so much of this big data, simulations, agent-based modeling, and increasingly, urban planning has brought social behavioral sciences into the picture. In fact, I was on some of the reviews, steering and also operational committees. At one point, we were a bit nasty, we said that all your proposals need to have some social behavioral component to it, because we realized that if we don't say that, people will just do the traditional way, and we don't have time to let people take their own sweet time. So we were like trying to nudge people, that's a behavioral term, to nudge people to say, go and do it. An unintended negative consequence of that, of course, is that sometimes, I get a call or an email the day before the deadline of another research team trying to submit the proposals, and David, can you please put your name inside as my co-PI? I was like, what? When are you doing submitting? Tomorrow is the deadline. So what I'm trying to tell you is that let's also have an unintended negative consequence of what we did. And so we were very careful now in Social Science Research Council to say that, well, multidisciplinary is important, but we are not saying that for every project you must put somebody in, that somebody should be a partner with you right from the start. Just like what we are doing, right? In fact, 2 years ago we started this. At some point we were putting a grant. We're not going to put some people's strange names on it at the last minute, right? So you want to work on the problem statement together. And that goes to, that's urban planning, which is pretty long term. In urban planning, you typically think about 50 years and not like what happens tomorrow, right? But you are concerned about what happens tomorrow if the infrastructure is there, and then you are not resilient in all your aspirational things that you do. Right? So urban planning is the clearest example. Actually, is a forerunner, I think, in Singapore, right, in terms of the use of CSS, although they may have not used that name. Another small little version, I would say, right, it is in online sentiments analysis, but not just in trying to figure out what is a positive statement, negative statement. I think maybe Joe's presentation I saw in the program will probably speak a bit to that, right? The whole idea about really the digital trace data, what they can tell us, and so on. And that covers everything, right? Basically transactions and so on. And I think those, in the very broadest terms, I think those two areas are probably the most important. There's a third area and nobody really is doing it, and that's why Bukit and I we are working on this. And that is to really improve social science understanding of different kinds of relationship. Like if A causes B, if you're trying to be adaptive, these are the predictors, these are the correlate, how to be resilient. You'll find that in the whole social science literature is actually based on very static data. So I, for example, have tons and tons, I've been doing adaptively for 30 years, right? I have tons of data that are experimental, national, cross-sectional and everything. I work with government, so I have a lot of data that they will allow me to publish most of them, if not all. But you need computational science actually to help me to actually translate that into really what happened, because the data are a bit different nowadays. And actually computational science has this wonderful ability to actually model some of these relationships that the literature does not produce, the parameter estimates. So in my wonderful model, I have actually 7 big cluster of variables. There's 2 variables relationship that are so important, but actually nobody has done enough research on it. Actually, I don't really have to go and wait for another 5 years. I can use agent-based modeling and some methods that actually won't get developed together with my statistical abilities, right, to actually model and be able to guess within very reasonable estimates what is that relationship. What's the practical thing about this? Very important. Now, if the government believes my model, the government will have some kind of a dashboard for its scenario planning and contingencies to think about what happens if public trust goes down. Okay, according to this so-called David Bukes and company's model, I can play around with these and so on, right? And those are much better than chance, much better than the opinion of one minister versus another, because now we have empirical information to inform. So I don't have to have a situation where pump sacks between ministries trying to argue that no, actually this is how the world operates. The two pump sacks can sit together and say, okay, based on this data, which has no vested interest in which pump sack is correct, right? You will then be able to say that, okay, within this empirical scenario, so these are the kinds of margin of error or margin of tolerance we can do if we were to implement, say, this policy and so on. I think maybe we can open up for questions, because otherwise we will be talking too much.
Thank you so much, David. I think this will be a good time to look into any questions from the floor. Would anyone like to get it started? We can pass the mic now. Yeah.
Oh. Start the ball rolling. Thanks, David, for the sharing. I've learned a lot over the last 30 minutes. 2 days ago, Minister Chan mentioned that social science researchers that can offer solutions to some of our national challenges would be recognized. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on what does it take to bring social science research from research to results and from study to solutions. Because in our midst, I think we also have some computer scientists, and to them, solution has a certain form and embodiment. But when we talk about social science, that solutioning, how should we envision what is a social science solution? And in the context of CSS, is there something that we can do to help to build towards that solution that the government is looking for?
Okay. I'm so tempted to say, oh, can you ask Minister Chan and not Professor Chan? But the video is going viral now. Okay, no, but I think Asuri's got an important point, right? And actually, I think our solutions are the same, right? I think ultimately what motivated, I worked with A-Star for a long time, right? For multiple years. I chair a group, a committee that look at your grants. Some of the colleagues here, don't hate me if we rejected. It's really not just because of one person who made the decision. I think it's the same, right? If you look at COVID, for example, we were concerned, so whether you're social scientists or the computational technological people, we are part of a puzzle trying to reach the same solution, right? And that is life and living in Singapore. How do we ensure that it is good, right? So whether it's urban planning that you want to living in optimally in a dense thing, ultimately it's about citizen, or actually not citizen, about peoples in Singapore, because if you throw a ball and it drops in Singapore, actually only 6 times it landed on a citizen, right? 4 times it landed on either a PR or a foreigner living in Singapore. So you cannot just be citizen-centric, you must be people-centric. And it's about the people in Singapore. How do we then increase their quality of life? And quality of life is not some fluffy thing, right? It's the actual construct. You look at United Nations, UNESCO, you look at all kinds of international organizations. Quality of life is rigorously studied, very important. Psychologists, sociologists, right, actually make livings out of quality of life and well-being stuff. So ultimately it's the same, right? And I would argue that in Singapore it's not difficult, right? We know what are the 5 or 6 societal goals in Singapore. About making sure we live cohesively, multiracialism, able to be adaptive, being a small size but still be able to make an impact in the world. But ultimately, it's all about people in Singapore, that we have a good quality of life and our way of living. So computation scientists know to all the wonderful things you do, make sure that old person doesn't fall alone at home and nobody knows when you have wearables. Ultimately, it is about quality of life of a person aging, with changing social structures that you don't have people who are caregiving. So these are the same things that sociologists, psychologists are interested in. So when we work together, our solutioning from the policymaker perspective, I would argue, is totally identical. A good policymaker, and there are plenty of them, and all that I work with, I dare say, they don't care about which discipline they come from. I worked literally 30 years with the public service. There are some people that work a lot with me, actually they didn't know that I'm not doing psychology with them, I'm doing sociology with them, for example, right? When we look at survey attitudes. And very often they look for good people. The government doesn't look for, are you a psychologist, are you a sociologist? if you have a good team, I think from my own experience, you provide a practical solution, and the solutions are crystal clear. To me, in the case of Singapore, right, it's about quality of life and the way of living, and then all the other things are means towards it, right? Be it urban planning or containing a riot, or wearables to have a healthy living in Singapore and stuff like that. So the solutioning, I think, I would say that the social scientists, that part is not so much of a problem. I think they are quite well informed. But what I'm a little bit worried is that the push towards the academic publications in top journals actually have a slight ambivalence in the social scientists. He or she knows what Singapore needs and what Singapore wants and what they can contribute. But I think sometimes the institutional reward structure, forces them to do work that can get published, but might not be work that they really know that can make a big impact. Which, for example, longitudinal work. Lots of good people don't want to do longitudinal work because they felt that it's too long before they publish. You do a 6 years to longitudinal work, that is exactly the time frame to get a tenure. But I would argue that you are misplaced if you think like that, because who says in a longitudinal 6-year study you cannot publish as the data keep coming, right? You can publish, and many of us have done that. So I think some of this needs a bit of education. It needs a bit of the good senior people to not just go retire, but hang around, and then work together with everyone to say that, look, this can be done this way, this can be done that way. Another way to do it is have a functional group. If you care about top publications, fine, right? I'll give you those kind of data that you can do top publication, but give me your knowledge to solve my practical problems. Then I have a functional group of researchers where I can still meet your individual goals, no matter how so-called self-interest in a enlightened way that I don't care. But now we have a team goal that we all need to do in order to meet your individual goal, right? That's like enlightened self-interest, isn't it? Right? I mean, I think it's a bit silly to try and tell the university or the people say, no, tenure is not the most important thing in life. Think national orientation, think Singapore. No, it doesn't work that way, right? You can think Singapore and still get your tenure. I think that should be the message.
Hello, I'm Ling Chu from NTU Psychology. Thanks, David, for sharing your thoughts about computational social science and giving us your views on the next 5 things or the next 5 years we can look forward to. I'm just wondering, follow up the question from the earlier audience. Since you mentioned that the computational social science, we use a lot of data, right? There's an enormous amount of data, and the data is very complicated, interconnected, so that will empower social scientists to better understand human behaviors. But if we look at the research that has been done so far in the past 15 years in computational social science, the theories, the findings, they are somehow, we don't see a lot of new breakthroughs, or as the earlier question mentioned, solutions to real problems. These findings and theories are still relatively very simple, explanation oriented, that helps us to understand certain phenomena, but they don't provide realistic solutions. For example, the low fertility rate is a big problem for many cities or countries, including Singapore. But you don't see a very successful or efficient model theory about how certain city or country can actually improve the fertility rate, right? So of course there are many social scientists investigate this problem in terms of how SES affects the birth rate, how women's social status affects this birth rate. So these models usually only look at 1 or 2 variables as the predictor and the outcome variable as the birth rate, right? So I'm wondering about your view. whether these simple models, although we have huge and complicated data that we have, we built these, derived these findings from these enormous data, but the findings seems to be still quite limited. And do they actually help us solve the complicated social problems? As you mentioned, the social issues may not be isolated between two variables, may not be as simple as theories in physics, for example. I think one issue that others mentioned, that social scientists look up to nature scientists, that we should build also very beautiful simple models as in physics. But the human society or human mind is a very complicated thing, right? So do you believe that we still should stick to this very simplified modeling approach that traditional social science has been doing, maybe due to the limitation of data source, due to the limitation of computational power, but now we have enormous data and enormous computational power. So should we change the paradigm or stick to the original traditional social science paradigm?
Yeah, I think there are actually two or three questions nested within what you said, which are really very important. One is much more, I think, difficult. The audience is very diverse, right? So you pardon me to try to work in a normal distribution rather than the right, left side tails of it. I think on the complicated parts of it, right, on the modeling, when he uses model, right, just for our computational people, it's not the same kind of model you mean. It really refers to a path model, right, where you have the different constructs, you know, and then you have the arrows going all over, then you have interaction, mediation, and so on. I think that's what you meant when you say, should our model be simplified or complex, right? But if I take psychology or sociology, which I'm quite familiar with, given my work, I think actually within social sciences, you can't say we are simplified or complex, right? By now, I would have reviewed thousands of academic articles, right? And including those who didn't get published. And I think we can sometimes very simple studies with just 3 variables or 3 constructs, sometimes even 2. One is also quite impossible because at one you cannot have a relationship, so it's usually 2 or 3. But there are complex models, you know, with 6, 7, 8 type constructs and so on. I myself probably have published anything from 2 to 10 or more constructs. So I think it's more diverse than it appears. I would argue that it is not a level of specificity that's important. It depends on the problem that you are faced with. I would also argue, then goes to the second part of the question. So I don't think there's an issue of do we be more simple or more complex, because right now I think we cover the range. It should be given the particular scientific or particular problem at hand, what is the level of specificity my model needs to be to answer the question. I think what we are lacking is there are plenty of data that we guys, the social scientists, are not used to analyzing are available, and therefore we should capitalize on that. And once you capitalize on that, you might have new ways of operationalizing your same construct that you were interested in. So your model did not differ in specificity, but the measurement, the operationalization could become more varied or more robust in some sense, right, due to the help of our computational colleagues and so on. Another way, and this is more complex, is that they may tell us things that we never realize. I realized this in 1998. I realized that actually when you take a variable that we are interested in social sciences and you look at it from a temporal perspective, actually the variable changes almost qualitatively. So if I say things like, adapting to the public service as a new public civil servant, the way that we have been analyzing is I give you a survey or I ask your supervisor, I rate you as a cross-sectional data. And then we take the value, right? I compare, Peter, I compare Fred, and on their value on the measure that's static, and I say, oh, you're more adaptive than him or so. We compare the static values, right? We do that all the time. Don't bluff me to say you're not, right? We do that. But when you look at it, adaptation as a process, I begin to say that actually what is important is not a snapshot. What is important is I should track Peter and Fred and everybody else from same time 1 over the first 1 year, and I look at their trajectories, their growth, their functional form of their adaptation. So I have a good measure of how adaptive they are. I then track them, and then maybe their starting point, end point is exactly the same. I will wrongly concluded that they have no difference in adaptability. But when I look at it from a processual point of view, I realize that, in the case of Peter, You know, the first 3 months, actually, he was still trying to seek information, but once he got the information that he needed, he was able to have a steep slope and adapt very fast. In the case of Fred, maybe he didn't need the information because he already had it or he thought it wasn't relevant. But he was gradually, incrementally adapting, so he has a linear slope. Then I have a very different interpretation of their adaptability because of their differences in trajectory function. What have I done? The construct has not changed, but I have looked at the construct from a static to a changes over time perspective. And then when I look at that, I begin to be able to measure functional forms as a dependent variable. When I have different linear slopes, even though everybody is linear, I can say in terms of parameter, I have a dependent variable now, whether it's a young slope, steeper than his slope, right? Those are very important things, and that is really what we care about, because we don't just rate a civil servant at one point in time. We look at his potential, we look at his or her everything, and it is really the whole process. And that is important as he moves from time 1 to time k over multiple times. The trajectory function actually is correlated with other variables. I know when to intervene. I know when to decide whether you are hypo. Hypo is your high potential people. If I'm wrong, I go for the first 2 months, Peter won't end up being a high potential because he was still seeking information. Right? So I need to know at which point of inflection matters for my practical purpose, for my conceptual purpose. When will he stabilize? That's why late developers are so important. If you go and look at my PSLE, GCE O-level, and GCA level results, I almost didn't get into NUS, as an undergraduate, right? Now I'm not too bad as a psychologist, isn't it? So I'm probably a late developer. Maybe I chose the wrong discipline, I don't know, right? But if you were to measure me earlier in life, you will straight away conclude that David is below average, right, in the top talent in Singapore. Right? Maybe you still believe that, but that's my point, right? You need to have the trajectory function. So I don't think it's the number of variables or simplicity of models. It's the nature of the construct that actually may take an important change when you think about dynamics, temporal changes over time, and the operationalization. Now, what the computational people need from us is actually good statistics and measurement. And forgive me for saying that. A lot of computational scientists actually are very bad in statistics. They really don't know enough about statistics and measurement, right? Where the social scientists, the empirical ones, are very good in. You need to marry the two, right? It doesn't mean that data become dynamic. I don't care about ANOVA or regression or multilinear models. In fact, you need them more. Otherwise, you will apply it wrongly. Okay? You basically use latent growth model to model what I just said. Right? You don't use agent-based modeling alone. Right? You need to marry the two. In the question that the example that I just gave on public service, have adaptation or adapting to public service. Right? But what we do a snapshot. We show into a model, we run a structural equation, and we are happy. Final point, fertility, you said, right? I would disagree a bit, right? I would say that fertility is an ultimate long-term ratio. It's not an individual behavior, right? That's a societal issue. What we are trying to change is all the variables that might predict whether you have a happy life, whether you want to give birth or not, and so on, right? It is social phenomenon. If David Chan is happy remaining single and he contributes to the world and he dies happy, but he's not married, I think it's okay, right? And that happens to be the case, right? But it's a societal problem. You care. So what you do, you look at all the other variables that we are quite good at, right? So you look at quality of life, well-being. Can a man and a woman work less hours and still be more productive? Now the sociologist, psychologist tells you all these variables. Then you go increase all this. So when Minister Ong Ye Kung is trying to increase healthy SG, actually he's doing it ultimately, he hopes that it will somehow have good living. Ultimately, it should contribute to fertility in the very long run, right? So I think if you ask me, is baby bonus effective? I don't like to do that kind of research because I think it's not effective. No matter how you do, it's not effective. Right? You want to identify the variables that lead to good quality of life. Hopefully then some will get married and then some will give birth. And then you have good people, right? But some will remain single and be happy and need them as well. Okay.
Thanks very much. Any questions? Please also briefly let us know your name and where you're from. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm Wei Jie from Temasek Polytechnic. I'm a diploma psychology student. So I have a question. So I've done a lot of reading on health and, for example, this computational social science issue, right? I feel that I talked to a computational scientist before. He believed that using social science, behavioral nudging, behavioral science, the model itself is very dynamic, or it changes. For example, a very simple or very classical model like theory of planned behavior, right? like he doesn't believe that with the current path estimate or the statistics, right, it seems very blurry because how we measure it and the statistics, how it correlates, right, is very low. So he doesn't think that social science is that well developed to put into AI or computational science because the model itself has some questioning. But however, like this is from my understanding, my educational background, I may have some ignorance, so I want to know what is Professor David, what's your point of view?
Sorry, but who is this he? Don't give me the name, but who is this he? Is he a lecturer or?
He's a PhD in artificial intelligence.
In Temasek Poly?
No.
Luckily not. Luckily not, because many of my students are now professors or instructors in Temasek Poly. Luckily not really. Well, I mean, that's a semi-joke aside. Well, I wouldn't call the person at all ill-informed or ignorant. That's number one, because at some point, many of us think in ways that actually, in the light of new information, we change our mind quite drastically, right? So first, I think our first reaction is that when you hear somebody, whether it's senior or powerful or junior, right, and the view is really quite different from yours, either the person could be way wrong or you could be way wrong actually, right? So I think it's quite okay to hear views that are so drastically different and almost annoying and almost like you want to just shout at the person, right? It takes a lot of, it's very hard to do that because I'm more the former. I tend to tell you why you are wrong, but it is quite important to really especially in CSS to pause, right? Reflect, refrain, and maybe because you might be the one who are wrong, maybe both quite wrong, and together then we get the right answer. So that's the first general suggestion to how we look at perspectives that are so different from what we are used to. And I can't really answer the question, I think, in a very clear way. He mentioned theory of planned behavior. The theory of planned behavior is just one of the more famous theories on how behaviors, right? On how people actually have intentions and how people have behavior, and the intentions, to what extent the intentions lead to behavior, right? I mean, I have a very high intention to reduce my belly, after I came back from 1 month holiday, but I don't think it will translate into my behavior in the near future, right? So that's intention and behavior. You can have wonderful, serious intention, but behavior is quite a different sort of thing. So I can't really go into the details now. During the break, we can converse. I would just actually kind of end there and say that I think there are very different perspectives out there. So we're not sure who is right and wrong, and maybe that's not the correct way to frame it. And then over time, I think all will realize that you really need each other. I think CSS, if one side or any side think that you can understand the world alone, I think we'll be in trouble. The good news in Singapore is that A-Star approached me rather than I approach A-Star, suggests to you that they already know the importance of computational social scientists, right? As I work with them, I wouldn't say which university, but as I work with them, as I see my social science colleagues, and I've been to several places, not just SFU, sometimes I say the horrible things, which is like, I think sometimes social scientists are more resistant to the computational people than the other way around. Because we have some disciplines, or some people in some disciplines still tend to have that wrong conception of CSS or C, the computational, that you guys don't understand the qualia, the essence of human being. You are all about numbers and simulations. There's a total misunderstanding of what simulation does. And the underlying assumptions of those guys. The fact that they are trying to approach you means they know that you have something to offer. The last point, I think I would say that the message that I just said is even more for the senior people than the junior. As we get more senior, we become more resistant to change. As you become an expert in your discipline, you are less likely to believe that your discipline may actually have something quite wrong, that the other discipline is correct. Right? So my message is targeted actually at the mid and senior level people, and I think we are role models. And I think we are the one that will affect how our younger people think, because we affect their we look at their processes, we give them advice and so on. So if there's one thing I think that's kind of where you are going to, is that I think we need a mindset change of our researchers. I think less of policymakers. Policymakers know that they need us. I think more of our researchers and of different disciplines, we need different things. I think CSS, computational people should slow down, don't start going and tell government you know the answer. Once you have lots of data or a model that works, right? Once you have some sentiment analysis and you say, I have this number, and then you act as if you really solve the problem, I think you want to slow down on that part. I work with the people who knows quite a lot. Social scientists there's no easy way, I did a Monte Carlo simulation with my colleagues in 1990s, right? So I'm not unfamiliar, but I have to learn in the past few years. I have to read, I have to go to sessions and try to understand more about how agent-based modeling has developed. Monte Carlo is no longer in the 40s or 50s that I was doing it, so it's quite different now, right? So I think everybody needs to make some effort, right, to learn something new.
But don't go and be a programmer, right? I don't know how to program, but I think I can still function. So you must know what you do. Are we?
And thanks for the question, and thanks David for that insightful answer. In fact, I think somehow you managed to answer the last question I have already, which is really about where you see this. How do you think we can improve the overall quality of the area? And thanks for your remarks on that. On that note, I thought in order to be on time, we should wrap up here. And I want to, on behalf of everyone, thank Professor David Chan for his very insightful sharing, and for also sharing with us that actually don't to be too worried if you didn't do very well in your PSLE and all that. As they often say, right, 小时了了，大未必佳, right? So there's always a chance to correct, to do course correction, to be adaptable, to leverage on the dynamic process of enhancement. And that's actually a sneak preview of the kind of work that we are doing. So, and on that note, and thanks everyone. So for the next segment, perhaps I'll just share that from now until about 3:45, there's a short break. This is just a quick bio break, so to make yourself stretch a little bit, and we'll resume at 3:45, where we will resume with two short talks. After that, then we will have a general discussion at the end, and then we will break off for a networking reception at the end. So on that note, thanks very much, and enjoy the break. We'll see you at 3:45. Thanks.